Welcome to Deva Wargames. I'm Patrick, and I am sick of seeing Space Marines getting gunned down by lasguns. So I'm leaning into my inner transhuman dread by making an army of astartes using Custodes datasheets. 24 of the Imperium's greatest heroes, individually kitbashed and painted, drawn from the 24 coolest chapters that the galaxy has to offer. This is a big moment, folks. We've kitbashed 5 Imperial Fist successors so far, and this week we're going to make one of the big dogs, an Imperial Fist himself. Next week we'll be taking a break from the kitbashing and getting these models on the tabletop where they belong. If you're interested in that, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you get notified when it drops. Stick a like on this one while you're at it, it feeds my rampant vanity. Anyway, let's talk lore. Boy, where to start with the Imperial Fists? Since they're a first founding chapter, I guess it only makes sense to start with the beginning of the story of 40k, the Unification Wars and the Great Crusade. The Imperial Fists were founded as one of 20 great legions of Space Marines, the Legiones Astartes, with the express purpose of conquering the whole galaxy following the end of the Age of Strife. Towards the tail end of the unification of Terra, the Fists saw action in the conquest of the cities of the Crystal Sea, the fortress of the Fifth Circle, and the Windcaller clans of Himalaya. Just as a side note, the Unification Wars are one of my favourite parts of the setting. We've got just about enough information about it to know the sorts of things that were going on, but not quite so much that we don't need a healthy dose of imagination in order to colour between the lines. Like, who exactly were the Windcaller clans of Himalaya? I don't know, but they sound really cool. Did they have some sort of Archaeotech weather control system that they built a cargo cult around? Maybe they were ruled by a clan of shamans that drew upon the power of the winds of chaos. If anyone from Games Workshop ever watches or hears this, please do not write a series of 50 books about it. It works so much better as a mystery that we can wonder and speculate about. Soapbox tangents aside, once the techno-barbarians of Terra had been unified, the Fists went out into the galaxy along with the rest of the legions to xenocide all of the aliens they met and bring all the humans into compliance. Rogel Dawn, their Primarch, was discovered pretty early on in the Crusade, having become an extremely competent ruler of a small interstellar empire. He transitioned his leadership skills over to his new position as the leader of the 7th Legion. Very quickly, he formed them into a fighting force in his own image, stoic and honourable to the last. When the Emperor appointed Horus Lupercal as the War Master and retired from the Great Crusade to pursue his own projects on Terra, the Imperial Fists were recalled back from the Crusade and were given the task of fortifying the Imperial Heartlands. It's a bloody good job he did, too, or Horus's eventual rebellion would have destroyed the Imperium entirely without the efforts of the Fists. It was said that, in defence, there were no greater warriors in the galaxy. When the Horus heresy concluded, the Fists were broken up, along with all of the other legions, into chapters, representatives of which we've seen over the last 5 videos. The Imperial Fists retain Holy Terra as their legion homeworld, technically speaking, but realistically they operate more like a fleet-based chapter, recruiting from any number of worlds across Segmentum Solar. One of the most notable recruiting worlds is the hive world of Necromunda, where they have a long history from installing the ruling House Helmor to maintaining the containment perimeter around Hive Secundus. The Imperial Fists have been active right up to the present day, all 10,000 years, as one of the most prestigious chapters around. With their focus on defensive doctrine and their stoic disposition, we've got plenty to go on for the build. Speaking of, let's get to it. The Death Watch have license to use all sorts of alien technology, and that's not something I've really expressed yet. The first sergeant slash blade champion seems like a great excuse to make a start on that. I found these sick Tau force field effects from Battle FX and decided to centre the build around one of those printed in transparent resin. This is the one I went for in the end, as it's not as aggressively curved as some of the other options. Where there's a shield drone. This little chappy will be generating the shield. I just gotta figure out how that goes on a Space Marine. Picking out a body from one of the many Intercessor style kits, I decided eventually to go with this wide boy here. This is the sort of defensive power stance that all Imperial Fists have, just trust me on that one. I decided at this point that he should be holding the shield drone like a holy symbol or a lantern, rather than having it float next to him. He doesn't understand how these things work after all, and he doesn't care. So I picked out an arm with an extended sword, cut the sword off, and then repositioned the wrist so that the palm was facing downwards. These cuts with the knife tool are always quite fiddly to get right. The tools Blender provides for fine-tuning the cut's position just never quite seem to work very well. This is almost certainly a case of picnic, though. I'll get there eventually, presumably. Maybe I'll even try sculpting something myself one day. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Now that the wrist's off, I make sure to fill the gaps in the mesh so I don't give my slicer an aneurysm when I send this thing off to print, and then rotate the hand very, very slightly so that his palm is pointing downwards, as if he's holding a lantern outstretched. Once the hand is safely reattached to his arm, I'll dry fit the drone and the shield to see how the overall composition of the miniature would look if I went in this direction with it. Scaling down the drone and the shield so that they're in proportion, I get the shield in position so it looks like it's shooting out of the drone on those 3 bolts, rotating the shield here and there to make sure that the bolts aren't clipping through the drone too badly. Moving on to the helmet, I've been very good and kept myself away from Mark 6 beakies for the last 4 builds, so I'm allowed one here as a treat. Keeping on theme for Tau technology, I felt inspired to give this guy a gun sword with a Tau pulse rifle built into it. Us humans have a surprisingly long history with building guns and crossbows into swords. We've been doing it practically ever since they were invented. It keeps cropping up throughout history, but it never seems to have caught on. As it turns out, humanity has always felt the call of the mole ninja. Now that I'd built a very cool but extremely impractical sword, I picked out an arm to go with it. Since the shield is the focal point of the model, I wanted the sword to be held low at ease, but still pushed forward a little. While I was doing the pose, I noticed that the sword looked just a bit lopsided, with the blade-gun combo not quite centered on the crossguard. So I selected all the nodes on the blade by selecting the join between that and the guard manually, and then selecting everything inside that loop. Once everything was balanced, I added the traditional 2nd edition backpack, and then moved on to looking at pauldrons. I picked one with an embossed Imperial Fist's emblem on it, as it's quite integral to the look, but I don't quite trust my freehand skills enough to just raw dog it yet. That said, the emblem is just a bit too embossed. Thankfully, it's not connected to the rest of the pauldron, so I can just select it and slide it back inside so that it will be just barely visible when printed, so I can essentially just paint by numbers. Catching up with what's on screen real quick, I separate the hand, drone and shield into a separate part so I can print them separately. The shield will be quite delicate, so I don't really fancy reaching around it to get my brush in. Throwing a cape on, the most heroic item of apparel, the build was pretty much done. Standing him next to my original Crimson Fist for scale, it's time to bring him into the real world. Transparent resin always looks so cool to me. I feel like there's some real untapped potential in this for cool effects, but I'm just not sure what they are just yet. The force field came out really nicely though, so it's time to get some paint on. I sprayed the mini the appropriately named Valrak Yellow from Colourforge. I always prime my yellow minis in a dark yellow directly. It saves a lot of time compared to putting down several layers of a base colour to get good coverage over black or even white. The first highlight is Vallejo Deep Yellow, and that goes all over the armour. Moving my lamps a little bit closer in so all of you can see what's going on too, I base coated all of the Tau Tech in white. I'm gonna speed paint the Tau Tech so it looks a little bit alien, like in a different painting style. I'm not sure if it's gonna work or have that effect, but I never will know if I don't give it a try. It took a good few coats to make this paint cover transparent resin, but we got there in the end. I also took this opportunity to paint his left knee and shoulder shield in white too, as I've got other plans for them. When we think of Tau, we think light ochre, so that's the colour I painted the drone and the pulse rifle. It was a 2-to-1 mix of ochre clay and maize yellow, I think, but honestly I don't think I was being all that specific about it, to be honest, when I was painting the mini. Once that's down, I'll pick out the metallics in death metal. There's not actually all that much metal on the Imperial Fist, just the sword, blade and fittings, his belt, and the backpack gubbins, I think. The next step is to paint his chest Imperialis in corn red as a base coat, as well as his helmet. Imperial Fist sergeants wear red helmets typically to denote their rank, so I figured I'd do that on this guy too, as he's got a character data sheet. It will set him apart from the others. Taking a moment to assess my progress, I decided that his cape was going to be red. I was tossing it up between that and black for a little bit, but I like my brightly coloured Space Marines, what can I say? I'm a 90s kid after all. The inside of the cloak just went black, as it's nice and muted, and it was my second choice of colour anyway. The base coat laid down, I moved on to the second highlight colour for the armour. I took some space dust from Army Painter and mixed the Vallejo Deep Yellow from earlier into it somewhat, as space dust on its own just felt a little bit desaturated, and I like bright, saturated colours on my minis. Time to lay down some red highlights now. I took Evil Sun's Scarlet and carefully painted it onto each and every feather on that Imperialis, leaving corn red in the crevices. The helmet gets the same treatment as well, with Evil Sun's Scarlet going on wherever the surface should catch the light. It's jobs like painting those feathers that make me really thankful that speed paints exist. Normally I'd just have bashed some red speed paint on there and it'd have looked quite decent, but that's not going to make me any better a painter. I've painted about 12,000 points of Imperial Guard using that method, and my ability sort of plateaued after about 3,000 points. Finishing up the Evil Sun's Scarlet on that cape, I moved on to Legendary Red from Army Painter. I'm conscious that the Crimson Fist's cloak right back at the beginning ended up a little bit flat looking, so I'm really pushing the contrast here and covering most of the base coat, even in the low areas. There we go, that's all done. All the normal painting is done now by and large, so it's time to get fancy with it. I painted his left pauldron off camera here, far too fiddly for me to be able to get any good footage of it, unfortunately. Looking at the art, Imperial Fists like to have black and white checker patterns in random places, so I'll do some on his left knee pad. This is a famously tricky thing to pull off, freehanding these squares, but I reckon everybody should have a crack at them occasionally. It's great practice for brush control. There we are. They're far from perfect, but they're better than the last set I did, and that's what counts. I painted his shoulder shield a deep grey colour, and then free-handed the inquisitorial eye onto it, to reflect his service to the Inquisition, where his personal heraldry would normally be displayed. Getting the letter looking square was pretty tough, and I did an okay-ish job of it, but practice makes perfect. Now all the big freehand bits are done, it's time to finish off some paperwork. I added a chainmail highlight to the sword blade here in jagged strokes along the edge of the blade to make it sort of flash in the light, and then picked out the letters and rim of the Deathwatch pauldron, as is tradition. I finished up the cape after that by adding in some dark grey highlights along the folds, in much the same way as I did with the red parts of the cape. I just took my black and mixed a little white into it to brighten up a little bit for each layer of highlight, of which I did 2. The second highlight mostly just went up the side of the cape here, to bring the values up to something comparable with the yellow armour that's right next to it. Lastly, as far as the armour is concerned, I did my panel lining with Vallejo Game Wash dipping formula, as it's nice and matte. This just goes into all of the little lines that cover the Space Marine armour, as well as the joints, so they're darkened down a little bit, but they're still the same sort of yellow as the rest of the armour. This adds some real contrast to the Mini when compared to those extreme space dust yellow highlights. I finally attached the shield at this point and decided that it wasn't quite blue enough. The resin is quite blue, but the shield is so thin that you don't really see it, unfortunately. So I thinned down some magic blue speed paint with speed paint medium until it was extremely translucent, and then added it all over the shield. After that was dry, I dry brushed the energy projections that support it in bluey white and painted the smoke on the outside grey. And with that, we have a completed Mini. We are finally there. The first full squad of individually kitbashed Marines is done. 380 points of the army boxed off. Remember, if you're enjoying the project, drop me a comment and a like, as it helps these videos get picked up in that old algorithm. Enough of that though, let's see the beauty shots. The concept for this one, holding the shield drone upside down like a lantern, and the pose really cooked on this one. I'm proud of it. It really emphasises the Imperium's complete ignorance of anything that lies outside their sphere. He's almost using this technological device as some sort of magical ward against harm. The actual force field looks great too, in its vibrant blue colour contrasting against his armour. Alien technology, human brutality. The transitions and shading on the armour also look really good as well. I'm happy with the level of contrast, especially when compared to the Black Templar's armour last week. In any case though, it's time for me to hand over to the other me for some closing thoughts. Well, that's a wrap on another Space Marine. I think this one went really well, actually. There was a little bit where I thought it was going to be a bit cooked after the print came out, mostly. The print didn't come out great, to be honest. If I show you the back of the Space Marine, like his backpack, it's kind of like blurred and warped down near the back of it. I think the resin that I used here, the transparent resin, is just a bit more sensitive than the normal sort of resin I use, and I just ran it back with the same settings, so toning down the exposure time next time I'm using this resin would be probably the play. But yeah, broadly speaking, it went really well. I really enjoy the tactical gun sword. I'm fond of gun swords. They're a bit rubbish, but I'm still fond of them anyway. But yeah, he came out really well. I'm happy with the pose, as I said before. And it's always good to get some practice in with checkers. And they look really nice and old school, which is my vibe. But yeah, that's it for me this week. Tune in next week. We're going to do a Horde mode battle report with all of the lore accurate Space Marines facing off a horde of Imperial Guardsmen. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned, and we will see you next week.